Context means the setting of a word or event. If a statement or remark is quoted out of context, the circumstances in which it was said are not fully or correctly reported, so that it seems to mean something different from the meaning that was intended. Here are just two examples of the many ways that out-of-context statements have been used by the entertainment business to boost their ratings and by politicians to attack their opponents. The out-of-context statement about Gogglebox reads, "The reality television series Gogglebox is the most addictive show of all time." James Garner, The Guardian. The full context reads differently. "The reality television series Gogglebox is the most ridiculous but addictive show of all times." James Garner, The Guardian. Likewise, the out-of-context comment about the chances of recession reads one way. "People ask me about the bond market. The chances of recession in Ireland is 100%. Jay Sullivan, Minister for Finance." The full context reads another way. "People ask me about the bond market. The chances of recession in Ireland is 100%. I am making a general point in terms of the long term." Jay Sullivan, Minister for Finance. The lesson to be learned here is that you should be wary of any quote, and if in doubt, look for the full context. What other item in these examples should you be on the lookout for? Who is James Garner? The Roman statesman Cicero said, "Every rational discussion of anything whatsoever should begin with a definition, in order to make clear what is the subject of dispute." For example, in a discussion about poverty in Ireland, it will be necessary to define what poverty is. In a discussion about abortion, you will have to define what abortion means for you. Termination of pregnancy or murder of an unborn child. We are told that we live in a republic, but in any discussion about whether we really do live in a republic, we will have to agree what we mean by a republic before any discussion can even begin. Let us take a closer look at the term poverty. An article in a reputable newspaper whose headline reads, "Who's in poverty? Depends on definition," poses a difficult question. The Irish government's definition of poverty is that people are living in poverty if their income and resources, that's material, cultural and social, are so inadequate as to preclude them from having a standard of living which is regarded as acceptable by Irish society generally. Less than 60% of median income. Do we need to do more work on this definition before we arrive at an agreed definition? It is not uncommon, in fact, for arguments about controversial questions to turn into arguments about the definition of terms. An argument on a subject might end almost as soon as it starts if writer and reader or speakers disagree on the definition of particular words. So while clear definitions do not guarantee agreement, they do ensure that all parties understand the nature of the argument. The definition of success, for example, varies not only among social groups, but also among individuals within the groups. How would you define a successful life? How do you think a member of a religious order might describe a successful life? Would you define success as being content? If a person has no interest in material things and is content to live his life without all the trappings of modern society, can his life or her life be viewed as successful? One sort of definition, the sort we find in a dictionary, is known as a reportative definition. It reports how the word is actually used. A reportative definition can go wrong only if it fails to report how people use the word. For example, defining table as a small, soft-furred animal. Stipulative definitions establish or refine meaning for a particular purpose. I defined an argument at the start of these talks as an attempt to justify a claim. I defined an argument in this way because the everyday use of argument can include quarrels or fights. Since I defined argument at the outset, it is not likely that anyone expects a discussion of what objects are acceptable to throw during fights. As an example, let us say we are describing the distribution of herring within a 12-mile limit of the Irish coastline. Let us say the study started like this. The study aims to gain information about the distribution and seasonal movement of juvenile herring, that is 0 to 3 years, around the Irish coast. By defining juvenile as herring between 0 and 3 years, the author makes clear what the study is about. Without that definition, many listeners or readers would have no real understanding of the report. There are two great advantages to stipulative definitions. The first advantage is that they delimit your topic. In other words, you set out the boundaries of what is to be discussed. The second advantage is that you guide the expectation of the reader or listener so that your arguments receive the consideration you want. In an exam situation, this approach would certainly be appreciated by the marker. Any spoken argument can also benefit from a clear stipulative definition of terms at the outset. Think of how many hours of unproductive discussion could be saved on topics like abortion, family, etc., if at the outset each contributor was asked to clearly define what they understood the terms to mean. It is very important to have some basic knowledge of statistical arguments because they are widely used. Statistics have a certain surface certainty attached to them because they sell a mathematical certainty. But statistics should be treated in the same way as any other claim. The questions you must ask are they recent? How up to date are your statistics? Are they sufficient? Was the sample taken of sufficient size? Because the bigger your sample, the easier it will be to support your conclusion. When you have satisfied yourself that the statistics are recent and sufficient, then you will need to address additional questions. Do the statistics come from trustworthy sources? And are the terms clearly defined? Finally, you must ask the question, has any significant information been omitted from the statistical landscape? In this example, if we take the claims of the publishers of the Plain Truth magazine at face value, we would be very impressed with the circulation figures. The Plain Truth has now topped 10 million copies per issue. New subscribers are coming in at the rate of around 40,000 per week. But If we ask more questions, we would discover that the magazine is in fact free, which largely accounts for the very impressive statistics. In the advertising world, many claims made are supported by little or no evidence, but that does not stop their effectiveness. In 1954, a psychologist named Abraham Maslow classified our needs as being psychological needs, safety needs, belonging and love needs, esteem needs, self-actualization needs. These needs are arranged here in hierarchical order. Let us look at two of these needs, namely safety and esteem needs, and see how the advertising and political establishment use their knowledge of our needs to sell us lots of stuff, and in the case of a political party, convince us to support them come election day. Under the safety needs category, we could list security, freedom from harm, order and stability. Advertisers for house alarms, private health insurance, life assurance, pension funds, etc. will play on your basic security needs to sell you their products. As a result, their claims will be less concerned with raw, provable data to support their product and more concerned with stoking your fears about security. Some political parties likewise emphasise their credentials as law and order parties who will put more Gardaí on the streets, build more prisons, etc., while avoiding the sort of critical thinking on the causes of crime. For example, poverty, lack of educational opportunity, etc. Under esteem needs, we could list material success, achievement, power, status, recognition by others. A car advertiser will be less interested in horsepower and more in what the car says about you. That you are a success because you can afford to buy our latest model. The critical thinker will look beneath the bonnet of any exaggerated claim and ask what supports exist for such a claim. Slanting, says one dictionary, is interpreting or presenting in line with a special interest. It means that the arguer has selected facts and words to create the impression that no alternative view exists or can be defended. For some questions, it is true that no alternative point of view is worth putting forward, and we would be perfectly justified in using strong or emotionally charged language to make our views known. We are not neutral, nor should we be, about abuse of human rights, genocide or animal cruelty, to name but a few. Most of the arguments you will come across, however, will concern controversial questions about which people of goodwill can argue on both sides. When listening to or reading an argument, always be on the lookout for slanting or bias. This may take the form of overuse of emotional language or a judgment made without regard to all the facts. R.D. Laing, a Scottish psychiatrist, defined prayer in this way: someone gibbering away on his or her knees, talking to someone who is not there. While Laing may hold these views himself, some people of faith would find the terms gibbering or someone who is not there grossly offensive. Laing has slanted an argument about belief in God by using emotional terms. Nowadays, we find slanting everywhere, not only in advertising, where we expect to find it, but in many newspapers whose reputations were built on impartial reporting. Whenever you read or hear emotional language used in this way, you should always take a step back and ask yourself whether you are getting both sides of the argument, or whether facts that do not suit the argument are being deliberately or unconsciously omitted. On the other hand, facts that suit the argument may be taken out of context or given an undeserved importance. Having said that, keep in mind that emotional language of itself does not prove or disprove a slanting in the argument, but its use should act as a warning to you about whether somebody with a vested interest is trying to manipulate the argument for his or her own end.